welcome everybody. First time doing this. This is all about your contributions. Chat is open. It's going to be a small enough group for that to work really well. I'm Jonathan Kay. I used to be a chemical pathologist in Oxford. I left that to become Clinical Informatics Director of NHS England when it was formed. Since then, I've been Professor of Health Informatics, University College London, but I'm here because I'm Chair of the Council of the Faculty. Welcome, everybody. How do we do this in order? Zaid, please.
Yeah, so I'm based in London at the moment, but I'm a first-year student at the University of Bradford. I'm investigating the role of technology in monitoring COVID-19. Interesting, and I'm happy to be here. The recommendation was made by my supervisor, that's Professor Rebecca Randall, which was why I joined the faculty.
Fantastic, thank you. Aura.
Hi everyone, I'm currently enrolled in a STP scientific training program in health informatics, and I'm based in Cardiff, Wales.
Thank you. Should that have been Aura?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Lost Nick. Haroon.
Hi, my name's Haroon. I'm a research software engineer at UCL, but with a background as a clinical scientist in scientific computing, having gone through the scientific training program.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi everyone, I'm Lizzie. I am a second year scientist trainee on the cancer genomics pathway, but I used to work in informatics at Southampton Hospital, so I've got a little bit of experience there as well, trying to bring it all together.
Thank you. Virgilio?
Hello, I'm Virgilio. I am the head of scientific computing for radiotherapy physics in Southampton, taking care of our IT systems plus in-house software development.
Ah, thank you. That's Virgilio, I should say, is it? Yeah?
Virgilio, yes.
Where are you from?
Originally from Romania.
From Romania?
Yeah.
Makeba?
Hi, I'm Makeba Nash. I am the Chief Nurse and Informatics Officer at Croydon Health Services. I am potentially I am the bridge between IT and the clinicians and the business. So it's ensuring that we improve safety across all our digital implementations, but also that meets the needs of the clinicians and more importantly, the patients.
Yeah. Lorenz?
Hi, I'm Lorenz. I'm a second-year STP trainee in biochemistry, having come with a PhD with a bioinformatics base. And we have fun right now at Manchester Foundation Trust, completely redesigning our LIMS system and replacing it and EPI with a single combined platform that's supposed to do everything in a bag of chips and which has a lot of potential. And until that is finished, I am hacking into our LIMS with a custom ANSI-based client written in Python because I am tired of doing things myself.
I'm fascinated by the idea that that project's going to be finished one day. Yes. James, please.
Sorry, I was just hunting for the right buttons there. So I did the STP Bioinformatics in Physical Sciences a number of years ago. Now in Southampton, number of hats. I'm a senior clinical scientist there and software engineer, but also leading the medical device software group for our trust, which is starting to do things like the sort of clinical safety and medical device quality for regional programs, like you might have seen it in the news, the Hampshire and Isle of Wight saliva testing program.
Yep, thanks. Welcome, Andrew. A few lines by yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you, and I apologise for being late. I was sitting in a room by myself. There was another link from before. So sorry. I apologise because I'm called Andrew as well, and I think I just stood on top of a different Andrew. Apologies, complete numpty.
Right, Andrew Simpson, please.
Hello. So I'm a trainee clinical scientist in the clinical measurement section of medical physics in Middlesbrough. So at the moment, I'm learning how to do physiological measurements on patients, and originally I'm from a computer science background, so I'm trying to look at how technology can improve these measurements as well. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that anyway in my talk. So,
thank you. Have I missed any participants apart from Shalane? Shalane, please.
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Shalane. I'm the Membership and Marketing Officer at the faculty. I think I've been in correspondence with most of you, so nice to meet you all.
Yeah, a really nice timing for coming and doing that. Okay, thanks everybody. I'm going to give a spiel about the faculty. This is all open from here on, so hands up, chat on, please join in. You own this SIG. Okay, so I've given my background. So I've worked in highly automated laboratories. I've worked in screening. I've also worked in informatics at various levels. About the faculty, well, you've probably got most of this already, but let's go through just a little bit of constitutional stuff. We're a professional membership society. We're constituted as a charitable incorporated organization. So that's a sort of UK charity that works really well for us. It does mean we have trustees. It does mean we report to the Charity Commission. Funding is predominantly by membership fees and a block grant from Health Education England, which has just been extended, renewed. But we're not an English institution. We're not an NHS institution. So we're international. That includes 4 countries. Representation is actually pretty good across 4 countries. I'll come to where it isn't very good at the moment. But of course, most people are either in the working in the NHS or supplying to the NHS or patients of the NHS. But we're not an NHS body, but we work really closely with NHSX, NHS Digital and Health Education England. What's the ambition? Well, the ambition is to be so well known as a professional membership society that we're taken for granted. We're not at that phase. We're still going out explaining to people who we are. That will change. In terms of membership, we have 3 categories: fellows, members and associates, and we now have over 1,000. And that has gone even faster than we expected. That's just great news, but it means you have to do some work earlier than we're expecting. Communication's harder as you get bigger. There's a wider range of people. We're pretty well covered on the 4 countries. Our membership largely reflects the membership of people out there doing the work. So we've just done the diversity review and the results of that are available to everybody. Lots of medics, lots and lots of pharmacists. Really interesting why that's taken off. It's shouting out at us that we're not attracting nurses the way we need to, the biggest group. But we have a nursing AHP leads, we have nursing and AHP special interest groups and professional interest groups. But that's sitting there about why we're not cracking that at the moment. Makeba, if you've got any views on that, I'd be really interested in what we could do about it. Because that's the biggest staff group in healthcare.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are we doing about benefits? Because it's one thing to attract people the first time. It's another thing to keep them in a professional membership society when you don't have to be there. Everyone here is a volunteer. That's a bit different from the world I grew up of medicine, where whatever you say about royal colleges and things like that, in practice, you've got to be there. Yeah, we're really different from that. And of course, the language of our profession is not well understood. So we keep coming back to clinical informatics. Some people can't stand it. Some people say it's completely different. Some people say, is that ICT? It's not well understood. That's the word we're using at the moment. We're strong on the work on core competencies. And that is, what do you need to enter this? What do you need to progress? What do you need in personal development? What should be in job descriptions? What are career ambitions? What are role models? But the core competency work is a bit hard to get into if you haven't been involved in it. And the presentation of that's going to be really important. So we're looking for sweet spots for that, which are job description, professional development, appraisals, performance review. If we get the same language used across all of those, it's going to be much easier for us to understand. What's a special interest group? Well, of course, we've got constituted committees and subcommittees and agenda and minutes and reporting and lines of delegation. Special interest groups are supposed to be as free of that as is humanly possible. So you can get on with peer-to-peer work, making contact with each other, sharing experiences, sharing bad experiences. So there's very light reporting requirements on special interest groups, and they are inherently bottom up. And Please don't spend your time wondering about administration reporting to the faculty, and we'll look after that in various ways. Please get on with thinking about the future and how it looks to you and what concerns you've got and why people don't recognize your profession and all that sort of stuff. The SIGs are supposed to be very, very light on the ground, not tied up with constitutional issues. However, the SIGs are taking off really well. That's fantastic. There are lots of them. And we do have to think about how you're going to learn from each other. That's probably not about domain knowledge. It's about how to do business efficiently. Do mail groups work? Do web groups work? Do you effectively need online meetings? How little paperwork can you actually do? How do you join in with things like the annual scientific conference? That's coming up, and it's a fantastic opportunity for this SIG to let people know what you're up to and who you are. So the program is set for that, but it's going to be online. So the participation is up to the participants, and that's going to be really interesting. And I hope that for people early in their careers, that conference also gives a way to present your own work, the modern equivalent of posters of work you don't want to quite publish yet, but you want to put up and have people discussing, and how it has a life after the conference. And then on the formal publication side, and I think clinical informatics is incredibly deficient in publishing good work. You just sort of do it, but it never gets published. We've got into bed with the British Computer Society and the BMJ, and we have seats on the editorial panel of their rehashed journal. And we have webinars on how to publish your work. And if we're going to be taken seriously in the future, then better publication in clinical informatics is one of the things we really have to address. Healthcare scientists, this is for you to tell me where I got this wrong. I think there's a problem, not in the understanding the importance of healthcare scientists, but at the center, the word is used, healthcare scientist. This categorizes who you are. But in practice, you're actually in your own departments doing really important work. You probably don't call yourself healthcare scientist. And I don't actually know of a hospital that has a division that looks like that. You have lots and lots of different departments. And that comes from laboratory medicine. And the splits within laboratory medicine are big enough, within laboratory medicine, are big enough to completely wreck people's careers, about microbiology and biochemistry and issues like that. And somehow we have to handle all of those. And I'm hoping to hear something about that today, about how much of a unity you think healthcare science really is, and how much it needs to be. That's my spiel. Thanks for listening. I'm going to hand over now, but as before, it's hands up, chat on for the rest of this meeting. Thank you.
Cool. So I provided a slideshow because I didn't know it was going to be like a PowerPoint type thing. So I could share my screen on that if you like. 2 seconds. It's not too much of a death.
Andrew, thank you, and thank you very much, Jonathan. Do pop questions in the chat, and or we'll have a few questions at the end as well. So Andrew, away you go.
Cool. I'll just share my screen. Here we go. Can everybody see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. So just a little bit about me. I did a computer science degree in 2011, and I worked in general IT for a few years. I didn't really know that computing was a thing in the NHS. So I spotted a job as a clinical computing technologist back in 2014 in our local medical physics department, and I joined then. Spent several years doing that, and then it was in that role I learned that there's this role called healthcare scientists, clinical scientists. So in 2019, I successfully gained employment in the same department, but in the clinical measurement team as a trainee clinical scientist, and I'm doing this through Route 2. Some may be familiar with this, with the Association of Clinical Scientists. So I'm not doing the scientist training program, I'm doing a portfolio route into training. But I did manage to do the first year of the medical physics STP modules at Newcastle University, just to give me some of the experience of the physics side of things, because I'm not a physicist by background. So, but it was interesting to learn that. In 2019, I became a chartered engineer, and this year, I finally, after corrections, illness, and more corrections, passed my master's in computer science. So this is what it sort of looks like for me in my career, in terms of membership, there's quite a lot of different bodies trying to do similar things. But I know the faculty of clinical informatics are trying to sort that out. For example, I'm a member of the BCS. I'm on their RIT tech register. I'm on the Federation of Informatics Professionals register as an advanced practitioner. I'm a member of IPEM, and I'm an associate of clinical informatics. I recently dropped the IET because it just became too expensive. too many different bodies, but it's really interesting to see that this, this one's trying to bring them all together. So in terms of me, this is how I sort of see my role as a clinical computer scientist. So in the trust in the medical physics, we sort of have that understanding of the IT and the understanding of the clinical stuff and medical devices, and we sort of sit in the middle of that to help achieve this whole benefit. I think that might be right. There's a few familiar faces in here that I recognise who are probably similar to that as well. So I mentioned that I worked in clinical measurement, which is a section in medical physics. So what is clinical measurement? So for us, we have a consulting clinical scientist who is a physicist by background. We have a principal clinical scientist who's a respiratory physiologist by background. And then there's me, who's training. We have a healthcare science practitioner who we call clinical technologists, who's an engineer. And we've got 2 healthcare science assistants. And we sort of work across all different areas of in clinical measurement all the services that we provide, which are these. So we provide overnight oximetry for outpatients and inpatients. So we have a little device there. You can see patient wears it on the finger. It records a pulse oximetry overnight, gives us an indication whether they have sleep disordered breathing or not. Our healthcare science assistants, they download these results. The clinical scientists quality check and review the results. And we just alert the consultants to urgent patients when the needs be. We also do intracranial pressure monitoring. So we go up to theatre, watch the surgeon inserts a skull bolt into the patient's skull. We connect up the transducer to make sure it's working, and then we take it back to the ward, connect the patient up, and we record the intracranial pressure overnight and give those results to the consultant. This is an interesting one because this device was built by our team, somebody who was previously here who no longer works with us. This is a good example of a medical device that uses software engineering and hardware engineering. We perform spinal monitoring. So I'm still training to do this, but the other members of the team do this quite regular. So I think Robert, or was it Jonathan, asked what the background was. We use electrodes. We've got them on our shelves there. We just stick the needles in the patients and monitor the motor potentials. And this is just to make sure that they don't get paralysed during this. Well, make sure there's no trauma or injury to the spine during surgery, because they're sort of inserting screws into the spine. And we do a lot of service development and support. So we do UV safety testing, and we develop medical devices and test those medical devices, and we get to use them as well, just like the intracranial pressure monitor, which is quite fun. So my training so far, so it was a steep learning curve because, like I said, I come from a computer science background with no knowledge of biology apart from A-level or anatomy. I'm learning that as I go along now, so I've gone the other way. A lot of people learn that first before going into healthcare. I've gone the other way. So it's quite interesting from sort of computing to be able to interpret and look at clinical results and sort of know what these signals mean. It's quite interesting. And then performing the physiological measurements on patients as well. As I said, connecting them up in theatre. It's a bit of an interesting experience. But I think my biggest advantage is that I can use my computing background to develop the software and technology to help perform these measurements, and possibly in the future analyze the results with AI and machine learning. It's a hot topic at the moment. I think everybody wants to be involved with that. So just a few examples of some projects that I've worked on. So this is an IT project. This is a backup solution for radiotherapy. This was one project that I did when I first started in radiotherapy. you can see there I've sort of planned out what it was going to look like, and then got the hardware in place and began backing up our critical systems. So that's an example of an IT project. Another project quite recently, which was related to my master's, was a human-computer interaction project to redesign our machine log for radiotherapy engineers. We had a problem where the radiographers weren't using the existing machine log, even though it had all the functions to record linear accelerator faults. So these are the big devices that they use to treat cancer patients with. This software helps them manage the faults reporting with them. So I redesigned it using methods like contextual inquiry. So these things you can look up. They're quite cool methods of design, just sitting and observing people to design software for them. And this is what it looks like now. And again, an even more recent one, and a pretty cool one, is 3D printing for orthopedic surgeons. So we've been 3D printing boards so the surgeons can plan complex surgery. I've got a good example here, actually, that I printed out. This is that one on the screen. I don't know whether you can. I might not be able to see my screen, actually. I'll show you after the presentation of one that I have here. But yeah, this is fairly new. So we use Slicer to pull the image from. So we pull the image from packs, use Slicer to cut the bits that we need, import it into Blender to extrude a number on there, bring it into MakerBot and print. So pretty cool. And there's the actual picture, a bit blurry. And a sort of computer science project that I'm going to be involved with is an algorithm for detecting intercranial pressure monitoring accelerometer artifact. So the ICP monitor that we developed has an accelerometer on it that detects the patient position, and we're just trying to figure out how we can sort of automatically spot artifact in there. So yeah, so that's just a few of the projects that I've worked on or I'm going to work on as a trainee clinical scientist in clinical measurement. Some of the issues that I've noticed, though, as I said, there's many professional bodies doing similar but slightly different things, but it's good to hear that the FCI is sort of looking into this and bringing the BCS together and other bodies together to sort of think about how we professionalize clinical informatics. A personal issue is making computer science grads more aware of the scientist training program for clinical bioinformatics. There's a lot of debate over its name at the moment, and I think a lot of other people here will agree with this. I think clinical bioinformatics makes computer science grads think it's sort of lab work, there's been talks of changing its name a little bit, but I know informatics as a whole is not well understood, so it's an interesting challenge. But yeah, that's the end of my quick talk on who I am and what we do. If there's any questions about that.
Andrew, thank you very much for that. It was fascinating.
Here's the bone.
Looking forward to seeing the bone. Yes, there we are.
For those who can see the screen, there it is there. Finished product.
There's a number of questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them out, or would you like just to pick them off yourself and speak through them?
I'll have a look. I've got the chat is muted. I can't see anything in the chat. Might be worth just going through them.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't actually see them.
Quickly scroll up. So the first one was from Haroon. Haroon, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So hey, Andy. Hope you're doing well.
And you.
Yeah. You always seem to turn up where I am. Yeah, I'm just interested on why in particular you dropped IET as opposed to one of the others. I've got a similar issue where I've got multiple memberships. I'm also thinking about joining the BCS, but I'm loath to join another society without dropping one of the existing ones. And I'm not dropping FCI or IPEM, so IET is the one I'm considering. What are your thoughts?
For me, I dropped the IET, well, again, because it was too expensive in the end, but because when I was applying for Chartered Engineer, the BCS were able to help me along that better than the IET were, because my degree was accredited by the BCS and the Engineering Council. So the process was easier that way.
Sure.
Yeah, and I also find that I think maybe it's more personal because I'm more involved in the BCS community. We have this community forum that we're all chatting into. but with the IET, I don't really see much of that happening.
Okay, so it's a personal opinion
Yeah.
about the community. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's good to
It's
know.
interesting that again you share the same challenge, that there's so many different bodies.
Yeah, part of it is because background as an engineer, so some are more relevant to that, some more relevant to the clinical side, some more relevant to the computing side. But cool, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks. And Andrew Riley, your question about the FCI and IPEM.
Yes. Does anyone know what's happening with the FCI and IPEM? Right, disclaimer, I'm currently a trustee of IPEM because I chair their Science Research and Innovation Council. And I'm aware of the discussion about IPEM used to have a computing and informatics SIG. I was part of that SIG. I enjoyed it. I love doing that kind of stuff. But really for, let's say, administrative reasons, the SIG was seen as not performing well and was converted in what's called community of interest. It's caused a huge uproar. But the root, the root, though, I think I want to get to is that the recognition of informatics professionals as scientists or whatever is something that IPEM has really struggled with. And I was encouraging reaching out to the FCI and trying to develop some sort of alliance to solve the problem. Because I know, looking at James, for example, this has come up multiple times in the past, and people who would traditionally have been medical physicists, like I am, but might have gone into the IT world, which if that had been available 20 years ago, I might have done. But I want to make sure that there's a route to support people, and so they don't end up hitting a brick wall because there's no professional development pathway for them in the organisation. So yeah, first question really is, does anyone know what's happening with IPEM? Is there anything I can do to give that shove in the background?
Jonathan.
Very interesting to hear that, Andrew. As I've put in the chat, I have engagement with IPEM and IET through what is called the Biomedical Steering Group, but I don't understand the landscape. So I'm in listening mode on this one. However, part of the reason that we've chosen the model of competencies is to allow people at any point in their career to look both for width and depth of what they want in order to move on. And that's the exact opposite from the NHS employment model for saying that you're an X and you're a Y, and therefore this follows, saying that something follows implicitly or explicitly. It's much closer to the model of portfolio careers and lifelong personal development. So that's using the language of competencies and not using the language of roles or job descriptions as a way of making progress out of this.
And it's really interesting you say that, Jonathan. I'm conscious Haroon's just popped his hand up there as well, because your question earlier about the healthcare science spectrum, I'm in Scotland. It's not always necessarily obvious. I just moved back to Scotland, and there's a reinvigoration of the healthcare science spectrum here, but all the hospitals have discrete departments for discrete individual services, and there is a thought that all these disparate individuals have been grouped together into a grouping called healthcare science, but just by putting everyone together doesn't mean it really is. And I chair a new group looking at the physical sciences, and we were trying to include bioinformatics because of the AI element, the acceptance testing and commissioning of equipment and so on, which is something that's well established in other areas, and we're trying to learn how to do it in AI. And then we've got with software development and so on, medical device development as part of that. And we encountered resistance because there was a view, no, this is not part of your physical sciences grouping. This is part of something completely different, very much aligned with pathogen genomics, obviously topical at the moment. And we really had to fight against that because I could see people like Andrew, who's just presented, not being represented. You would be lobbed into a different group and there would be false boundaries, in my view, put up. So I think the FCI's competence model is a very good way forward. And I want to see how we can make that more understood and accessible in areas where traditionally there would be, like Andrew mentioned, the scientist training program, which is a good program, but you're very much in lockstep doing a particular thing. In Scotland, we have a bit more flexibility. So I'm trying to think how can we be the vanguard for some of these things here, because we very much look at equivalence rather than following it to the letter as we go through. Sorry, I know Haroon, you had your hand up before I came back with that.
Well, no, I think you made some really good points there, and I think that's a big problem. Like, there's a split between the skills that we have and the application domain, and sometimes if you try to lob us into the sort of the historical splits between, say, physiological sciences, physical sciences, life sciences, it doesn't work because there's too much overlap. But the point I actually wanted to make was from your initial question about the relationship with IPEM and FCI. Have you been involved in conversations with Warren and McDonald recently about trying to reinvigorate the IPEM SIG and to make computing more of a front and center within IPEM, and then talking to other groups as well?
Yes, I have been. But one of the concerns I've got, and see if this resonates me with Andrew actually, who spoke earlier, in the IPEM landscape, clinical computing, say, is very much seen as an extension of engineering. My background was imaging physics and radiotherapy, so very much the opposite end of the spectrum. I wouldn't consider myself an engineer. Yet I did loads of software development and data analysis and so on. And I think that the new SIG which is being developed, there's a lot of work going into that, and that's really commendable. But I do think there are some people who don't know anything about it and would perhaps feel excluded because it's seen as something from the engineering world rather than something from the imaging world, for example. And I know there was a message, it might have been Andrew, but it might not have been, on one of the discussion groups recently. And it was like there was no awareness of this group. So
yeah.
Something is clearly going wrong in terms of that promotion of the initiative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem, yeah, I understand what you're saying, Andrew. It does sort of resonate, yeah. It's but yeah, it just doesn't feel like in IPEM there wasn't a sort of home for people like me going the other way, who are not like traditional engineers and who are not physicists, but computer scientists who are working in those areas and learning how to do the physics and the engineering.
This is really interesting. James.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. So I completely share your concerns, Andrew, about sort of the imaging physics world. That's obviously, I sit within imaging physics, and I'm part of the imaging physics scientific computing group, and that's why I joined those discussions, to really try and push for that. And I'm probably quite irritating to most of the other people involved in those discussions, because I'm singing from the same song sheet all the time, and probably sounding like a broken record. But I've brought FCI up in some of those discussions, and most people don't know what it is. And I think that's one of the problems within IPEM, is that the president might be aware of it, but nobody else is. And I did state that there's certainly an IPEM have a risk that everybody in this field is going to jump ship and go elsewhere if they don't sort it out. But what I do know is the SIG model, the idea is that gets removed and gets replaced with a different model that the computing group is going to be a test case for. And there's definitely a lot of concern about how useful those message forums are, because separate logins, and there's this sort of barrier to use. And a lot of people like these email groups, which are very easy to use because you can just reply to it. It's all there in your inbox, nothing to do. So I personally don't use those message groups on the IPEM website, because there's just one extra thing to remember how to use. IPEM are very keen on that, because it sounds like they've spent a considerable amount of money on that platform. So I'd probably recommend that the FCI doesn't go down that road.
Useful. I've got a couple of thoughts about this, and from a life science, my background is life sciences. It's pathology like Jonathan's, but from the biomedical scientist angle there. Is around roles that are cross-cutting, so things like education and training and quality, and clinical informatics is a role that I think is cross-cutting again across the specialties, as well as being integral to the broader disciplines. And Jonathan, I'm just wondering, there's the Academy of Health, well, there's two routes to registration and roles that are recognised in regulatory ways. One is through the Academy of Healthcare Sciences voluntary registers, and the other is through the Health and Care Professions Council. And I'm just wondering if there isn't something we could be doing there to get them to recognise the plurality of healthcare science. So that's an observation, which would make it easier for people to have their careers. Post-registration, it's a bit easier because you get certainly at HCPC, it's your scope of practice, and if your scope of practice is clinical informatics, then so be it. And I would argue that the competency is a great way to do your appraisals and your CPD for that. And I'll be interested in other people's thoughts on that. And I've got a question. I think it's to Makiba. Makiba, in your nursing role, how do the different areas of nursing manage this?
So I think for me, somebody mentioned terminology, and I think as nurses, I think the phrase clinical informatics, I don't know how well it resounds with nurses, especially being the largest part of the workforce. I think there's a few of us who are very passionate, but I think we struggle in lots of ways in terms of how do we market ourselves, because usually at the regular forums you hear all the terminology. So digital health would send things out, or various forums would send things out, and it's mostly it sounds very IT and technically focused, in that you're either a CIO or a CCIO, and there's quite a body of us coming along, and I don't know what we do in terms of how we spread that message. From a nursing perspective on the wards, let's take it back to that level. It's about how, I suppose, how me and people like me in my role relate what we do to patient care. And it's how we tell that story that we may need to be a lot better at. I may need to be a lot better at. But there's also something about leadership from the top and having your C-suite invest in that space as well for nurses, because generally, again, what you tend to hear is your CIOs and your CCIOs, but there's a big body of nurses, and let's not forget, when I say CNIO, I have this tussle within my organization where I can't forget the midwives and the AHPs, because we need to bring them all along on that journey. So it's a bit of a difficult one. In terms of career progression, again, I think it varies. So at some point when you get to a CNIO level in your organization, that's it. And there's not really a clear path as to how you take it to the next level, if that makes any sense. So it's a bit of a difficult one.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Just the similar sorts of challenges coming up, really. And I guess that's as a newly emerging profession that's coalescing, that those are the sorts of challenges that any group will face. That's really helpful. Just looking at the chat, Andrew Riley, you asked about the other Andrew about how he got into things. Do you want to ask that question?
Yeah, I was actually just typing a reply.
Oh, sorry, Andrew.
I could continue typing the reply. Or I could just say if you wanted to.
Okay, sure. Other people might be interested to hear as well. So yeah.
Okay, well, yeah. So I sort of changed because in my last job I was a clinical technologist in radiotherapy, and it sort of felt a bit like a dead end in a way, because I didn't want to go back into industry because industry don't get the interesting challenges of working in this environment. But I wanted to become more involved in the clinical work. I think radiotherapy might be really heavily regulated enough that you can't do anything unless you're either like MPA, or unless you're some medical physics expert or a registered clinical scientist. But maybe just a culture thing in different departments. I'm not too sure. So I guess I saw the role in clinical measurement, and they saw the potential, and I was able to bring my skills into learning the clinical work. As I said, like performing the clinical measurements in theatre and on wards, and learning that work, and having the computing background to develop stuff to facilitate that. I just don't think it was quite there in radiotherapy. And personal experience for me is I was told that there would not be development opportunities in computing in this department specifically, but
That's really
Yeah.
interesting, Andrew.
Yeah.
Thank you, because one of the things that I work in Glasgow, and we're a very big organisation. So because we're big, like some other departments have done, we can employ individuals with specific skill sets for specific, sometimes quite long-term projects. So we employ software developers to be software developers, and that's great. But we want to keep them. And so I've been challenging the people on the team to say, well, okay, what is the professional registration they could aim for that would be valuable to them, but would allow us to legitimately develop them and show their value to the development of the clinical service, for example. And it seems a bit artificial that the only routes are to become a clinical scientist to get that HCPC registration that gives you a stamp of approval. And I'm having conversations with our radiotherapy team just now. In fact, there's a physicist there who I've encouraged to join FCI, and I think he will. And he's kind of the other way. He's a clinical scientist, radiotherapy physicist first, but is responsible for all their IT. And I've been encouraging him to also become, let's say, qualified with recognised experience in that area, because I think there's a real value for these hybrid roles. The normal clinical scientist training model in England doesn't support that at all. In Scotland, we've got a bit more flexibility, but I think a lot of it is down, and I think this is probably, I'd be interested whether this resonates with everyone, it's down to how creative, imaginative, and how much leadership there is in the individual departments and hospitals, because some people won't want to go outside the comfort zone. And if you're in that department, you can't go anywhere. Whereas if you're in one where they're willing to work with you, I think there's a lot more scope. So that putting out role models for departments and so on might be a useful exercise for FCI that interest people can point the departments towards how to make things work. That could be quite useful.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I do think it is departmental. I think it's I think for me it's like there's a big divide between the different staff groups, and like, you know, the registered ones seem to be more superior ones in a way compared to, you know, if you know what I mean. To put it, well, gently.
Yeah. Okay. So really interesting views there. That issue, our big departments and small departments, is really interesting, but I've seen it work both ways as well. It's basically about flexibility and courage, you know, and leadership and doing all of those things. I would say, by the way, that the whole plan's about integrated care across sectors, integrated care systems, primary, secondary care joining, patient empowerment. None of that works without people who are prepared to step out of the box and get this technology working in ways that don't direct the response to one trust finance director. The key test for all of this just isn't going to happen unless people work completely differently. Really interesting views on the nursing side. Thanks for that. I'd also point out, having recently been an inpatient, that the amount of monitoring that's going on by nurses with connected devices and what you do with that information and why it never gets to the EPR is very similar to physiological measurement, except that it's very wide and thin rather than deep and, you know, and concentrated on spinal monitoring, you know, this crucial moment that you have to get right to a scale of 1/10 of a millimeter, you know, for a few hours. But everyone in hospital is being monitored with these devices, but a lot of information is being lost along the way because you procured the product, but then nobody did the joining up. The bit I missed earlier about personal development was mentorship, because I've heard a lot here where people talking to each other outside line management could be really useful in careers. And we do have an up and running scheme, obviously confidential. I don't think it's working quite right yet, but it is available to people and say, you know, where do I go from here? And I'm trying to develop this. Who can I talk to who isn't going to be involved in my direct employment? So we have that scheme up and running. And then we've got the wide, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, and then we've got that wider point of working with all of the professional associations. This is easy for the faculty at the moment, but won't be for very long. We're the new kids on the block, so we're going to work with everybody. And we're not a regulator. Now, that was easy for members and fellows where you have to belong to a PSA regulated profession already, so we don't have to. We didn't see the associate category taking off the way that it has. And of course, that doesn't work for those people because they don't have regulators. But in terms of personal development, we are exploring how to do that with the other bodies. So as associates who want to move to some sort of regulated status, we are actively working on that. But we didn't foresee the success of associateship. So we're in reactive mode to that, but we will get there. Okay, and the other bit is with people who have worked in industry, it's always looked to me as if industry doesn't get caught up in these titles and silos and tribes, yeah, because there's so much pressure. You've just got to get the job delivered that you don't spend your time doing it. I mean, any comments on things that industry might do better?
I think industry does have a lot of best practice from a lot of research, and we do get onto the topic of best practice quite a lot in other professional bodies. But what I see is like we go away developing new best practice against what industry are doing as best practice anyway, but we've changed best practice away from what industry are doing. Do you see what I mean?
NHS talks a lot about innovation. Innovation's important. Identification of transfer of good practice to me is about 10 times as important. If everyone could catch up with what's already out there in the best, I think we'd get more gain than by talking about blue skies innovation, but it's not so attractive to ministers. So identification and transfer of good practice, really important in a professional membership society. How do you do that in a SIG? How I spent my week. You don't do it by circulating really big documents, except in exceptional situations. How about how I spent my week? Yeah, blogs and sessions talking about that to understand each other.
Yeah, like a day in the life of.
Yeah.
Mm.
You'll immediately get reactions which are, wow, I had no idea that someone with a title like that did something like that. So you get this discovery mode that's really useful.
Yeah. I think from a nursing perspective, that's quite interesting because initially when I started my current role in the trust that I'm in, an awful lot of nurses saw me as and we have Cerner as an EPR. And so they saw me as the Cerner nurse, but actually it's about service design and that, user-centered design and thinking about how the technology supports that. And it's getting people to change that thinking. And that's what I meant by terminology. Initially, nurses think they need to be nurses and caring at the bedside. But what does that care look like? We have integrated devices, we have electronic records, we're putting data in. We talk about big data, but is that big data clean? What do you make of that data? And it's all of those things, and getting nurses at the bedside or clinicians in general at the bedside to understand why it is they're doing things differently, or how it is they can benchmark to really improve outcomes.
I think that's absolutely fascinating when you word it that way around. That's what I always said in our Cerner project in Oxford. This is a process improvement project with a tool called Cerner. But it was hard to remember at the time. And the first 5 years, it's very hard to keep your head up from the transition. Then we've got the point that I've got photographs of nursing stations with technology for which they were never designed, wires and cables. That's just the hardware. The skills problem is absolutely enormous. So what happened when Cerner, Epic go into hospitals is you discover pharmacists who are brought in to do medicines management, and then a year later they found that their portfolio skills extend across many other areas, and they're suddenly doing all sorts of things. So we've been delighted in the faculty within recruitment of both clinical pharmacists in hospital and community pharmacists for different reasons, but that doesn't seem to have worked for nurses. So if I could pick up with you one-to-one on that afterwards about where we're positioning ourselves, because I've no doubt about the importance of similarity of the tasks, it's where we position ourselves in order to make that attractive. That would be really kind. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's really helpful, and the other thing is also that sometimes we stop calling ourselves from a professional background. So we start to talk about, oh, I'm here from Cerner, or I'm here to do this or that role, as opposed to I'm a healthcare scientist, I'm a nurse, and I'm here too. And I think that's really important to include. I know it gets quite long, but that we are clinical informaticians.
Absolutely.
Okay, and just noticed there's been a few people who had registered to attend who haven't managed to get on. I've been tapping away in the background, alerting Shalane, and we're getting them in. So my apologies to those if they're joining now. Just towards the end, it has been recorded, so you will be able to watch the recording, and we'll try and do better next time. Any other questions that people want to raise at the moment? Okay, well, I've got a request, which is if you haven't already, would you go to the bit of the FCI website that enables you to join this special interest group and register so that we can get the messages out to you, please. And if you're not sure about that, Shalane, is it okay if they contact you?
Yes, I'll
Thank
include my
you.
details in here.
That's great, thank you. And we've got some speakers for our September meeting, which will be on the 24th of September at 12 o'clock. And I'm hoping that we're going to get a talk about the use of laboratory results and how you can display those visually. And also there's someone else who's prepared to talk about something from a medical physics background again. So and the information for that will go up on the website soon. So I'm looking at anything else in the questions. Things that people are putting in the chat. Is there anything that people want to raise? Just happy to have it in the chat. Okay.
Sorry, I think James asked me a question about the relationship with Trust IT. I replied. Did you see that, James? Was that okay?
Sorry, yeah, I realised that I was sort of asking. I was interested because there's a bit of an interesting relationship in general between the work of a scientific computing team and the work of an informatics team, and we kind of have to work quite hard to explain the difference to some people. But I think for us, we've gone through a bit of sort of strategy definition and things last year, and it's that scientific word that we really tried to hold on to. So we're developing quite a good relationship with informatics now, where we kind of work with each other quite a lot, but we're working on the scientific bits and they're working on the sort of data retrieval, archival, transfer sort of stuff. But we have quite a good level of communication now. I had to work very hard to get that, but I think we're sort of there now and supporting each other quite well.
Okay, that's really good. That's sort of similar to us now. We've got a better relationship, and they understand the different boundaries between what we do and what they do. So.
Okay. Well, that's been a fascinating meeting. Really interesting to hear everyone's perspectives. I think we've got a lot of opportunities with this group. As Jonathan said, not hierarchical. It's set up now. It's yours. You can. It's ours to do what we want with. I'm happy to coordinate things as the chair, and I'm happy to let things run. So I'm really enthusiastic about getting people involved in this. So don't wait to be asked, and don't think it's some hierarchical thing. If you want to get cracking with it, I'll help and find a way for you to do that. So look forward to having you all join the special interest group. You'll find it's listed as a professional interest group, I should say that, but you can't shorten that to SIG. Well, you can, but it doesn't come out very well. So we tend to use it. So if you're looking for it, you'll find us under the professional interest groups. And I look forward to seeing you all in September. So have a really nice summer. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.